Focus on Health, your weekly dose of health and wealth information on KUTV.
Welcome to Focus on Health, and thank you for joining us. My name is Barry Michelle. A brain tumor is an abnormal growth of cells in the brain. It can be cancerous or non-cancerous. There have been advancements in technology in order to aid in the diagnosis and treatment of brain tumors, and that's going to be our topic today on Focus on Health. Joining us for this conversation once again is Dr. NIMROD, but before we see Dr. on that, let us check out the health updates.
I'm a professor of surgery at the Kenyatta University, based at the Department of General Surgery, Kenyatta University. And I'm a specialist in I'm a neurosurgeon by specialty. I'm also a general surgeon and a physician. Thank you. Well, I don't think brain tumors really need to be defined, because what happens is it's like all tumors, and tumors are growths. So the other layman's term for tumor is growth, something which is growing. So something which is growing and it has grown in the brain, then we call it a brain tumor. You can have something which is growing and it has grown in the abdomen, we call it an abdominal tumor. We have something which is growing and it's growing in the prostate, we call that prostate tumor of the prostate. So basically, tumor means a growth. And it means that in that area, this is something abnormal. The cells sometimes do grow, but they grow in a controlled way. They grow when they are prompted to grow, and they stop growing when they are prompted to stop growing. The cells of your skin are constantly growing. If they stop growing, you'll get ulcers. But they are prompted to grow and replace the lost cells. So in tumors, in cancers, that control has disappeared. And then now the tumor, now we call that a growth, which is an uncontrolled growth, the tumor. Different types of brain tumors. And for the lay people, and for the ordinary people, the best way to describe it is that there are those tumors which are very bad, which we call malignant. And there are those tumors which are not so bad. They're still bad because they're in the head, which we call benign. Benign means, of course, they're not so serious. Okay, that's the terminology. Malignant means they're very serious. You get it? This is the English terminology. And therefore, once we understand that they are the benign tumors and we have the malignant tumors, then you'll start to appreciate how these tumors come up and the different types. And you'll hear someone telling you that I had tumor in the head, it was removed, and I'm cured. That was a benign tumor. So what are these benign tumors? The common ones are tumors we call meningiomas. Those are the benign tumors. So for the common person, I would like them to appreciate that the common benign tumors are the meningiomas. And it also just happens that these are also the commonest tumors, apart from the gliomas. And then now we have the very serious one, the malignant ones, which we call gliomas. Now those are the serious tumors. Okay? They are more aggressive. The benign ones are not so aggressive. They grow, but they grow in an almost controlled pattern. And once we remove them, the surrounding area, they have not destroyed it. And once we have removed them, that is the end. The malignant one, they grow in an uncontrolled pattern. So even if we remove them, the chances that we leave some behind. And they continue growing. So that makes their treatment very, very challenging. So these malignant ones, the common ones, are we group them into a group we call gliomas. So that is basically, for the lay people, I would probably like to leave it at that stage, that we have the very serious ones, which we call gliomas. We have the benign ones, which we call meningiomas. And these happen to be most of the tumors which the patient usually would have. There are many, many other types in the head. Like you can have tumors, for example, which can now arise from that area and are very characteristic of that area. Like, for example, in the brain, we have many structures in the brain. In the brain, we have an organ called the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland can have its own tumors of different types. Some are very serious, and some are not so serious. And the pituitary gland can have tumors which we can remove. We can have tumors which we can see in children, which we don't see in grown-ups. And these tumors which we see in children may be related to the development of the brain. So we can have tumors like what we call craniopharyngiomas, which you can see both in children as well as grown-ups. And these are found near the pituitary gland. So the best way is, as I've explained to you, to look at these tumors as to their seriousness. And then the other way to look at these tumors is at the location. For example, the tumors may be now, as I've explained to you, the ones in the pituitary, the location depending on the organ which is involved. For example, the pituitary gland is involved. And you can have the tumors which are located above in the head, which you call the top part of the head. And then the tumors which are located in the lower part of the head. And for the lay people, of course, I would like to leave it at that rather than confuse them with too many terminologies and words which will not make much sense. Just to explain to them these two tumors, which are the common ones which we find. And then, of course, to talk about the tumors which we see in children, which sometimes are related to development, like teratomas, or dermoid, which are related to developmental changes which may have taken place. Yeah. Now, the signs and symptoms of brain tumors, we have it into two groups. In fact, in three groups. We have the signs and symptoms which we see in small children when they are born up to the age of 2 years. Those are the children whose heads have not yet fused, the sutures haven't fused. When a child is born, the head continues to grow. And the head grows because there are areas in the skull we call sutures, which allow the head to grow. And once the child has grown up to a certain stage, those sutures, those gaps in the skull, they close. So like now, if we look at the head of the grown-up, the gaps which allow the head to grow have already closed. But if you look at the head of a child, those gaps are open. If you look at small children, newborns, and you look at the top of the head, you'll see the pulsation. Those are the gaps which allow the head to grow. And they close as soon as the child reaches the age where he is fully attained his growth. And therefore, that is very, very important. Because of those gaps, when a small child has a growth in the head, those gaps now separate. And the child presents with an enlarged head. So that is one of the symptoms which you may see, the child getting an enlarged head. And then irritability. He cries a lot. And of course, sleeps a lot. Those are the children those gaps haven't closed. And then now we can have the children who, let's say, at the age of 3 years, where those gaps have already closed. Now, if they get those tumors, the tumor there's no space for the head to enlarge, to accommodate the new development of the growth. So then the pressures become very high. And then the child gets headache. And it starts vomiting. And eventually becomes confused and may go into a coma. So the important symptoms which people must know is, as I've explained to you, headache, vomiting, and sometimes the eyesight starts being interfered. You notice that you can't see properly. And now these symptoms, which we see now in children who are above the age of 3 years and above, they're the same which we will see in adults also. Headache, vomiting, getting confused, and eventually getting into a comatose state because the vital signs have been compressed. Yeah. I would like to enlighten you on that. Cancer and brain tumors is one and the same. So when we talk of cancer, it's basically a growth. Okay? He has cancer. The cancer may not be malignant, and it may be benign, but a cancer is basically a growth. So brain tumors are basically cancers. And as you have asked me to explain, the cancers elsewhere in the body, there's a cancer of the prostate or cancer of the lung. You'll notice that when a patient has cancer, let's say of the lung, let's leave out cancer of the head, cancer of the lung, we want to know what type of cancer. And after we know what type of cancer, we want to know what stage is it before we start the treatment. Now, there is a stage we call stage 4. Stage 4 is where the cancer has gone into distant organs. And one of the distant organs is brain. So let's say a patient has cancer of the lung. Let's say bronchogenic carcinoma, which we diagnosed early, or let's say a patient who has cancer of the breast. And we diagnosed it early and we were managing it, and it starts spreading and it goes from stage 1, it goes to stage 2, and it goes to stage 3, and then now we start getting this patient who has cancer of the breast, but it has now spread to the lung, or it has spread to the liver, or it has spread to the brain. So that's the same way, the cancer spreading to the brain is the same cancer which now spreads can also spread to the lung, and can also spread to the liver. We call that metastasis. That is metastatic cancer. That is stage 4 cancer. The original was in the breast. Now, the head, the brain, is one of the commonest sites for spread of the primary cancers which arise outside the head. That is the breast, then the lung. They commonly metastasize. They go to the brain. In the Western world, those are the commonest tumors which are encountered. The ones which have started elsewhere and gone to the brain. In the Western world, the lifespan is longer. So most patients would live to 70, 80, and they would be having other pathologies which are being managed, which then can manifest themselves as secondaries in the head. In developing countries like ours, because our lifespan is a bit shorter, our patients are not living to the stage where we're seeing those brain metastases. We're still seeing them, but they're not the commonest as the way it is in the Western world. Now, when a patient has metastatic brain cancer, the management is very different from the primary brain cancer. We may remove it, and the patient may do very well. But we must make sure before we remove it that the primary site, we must make sure before we remove it that the primary site where it arose from is controlled. Because there's no point in dealing with the brain when the primary site is still having a cancer. So if the primary site, the cancer is controlled and there's no cancer in the primary site, then if it spreads to the brain, we may actually perform surgery and remove it. But again, it also depends on if it's accessible, its accessibility, and how many of those lumps are there in the brain. So if the patient is lucky and has got only one lump and it's accessible, we can remove it, and we have done that, and the patient gets good remission. And of course, we add with that other types of treatment like chemotherapy and radiotherapy.
We're going to take a slight commercial break, and when we come back, Dr. is going to be telling us about the complications of brain tumor. You can follow this conversation on our social media platforms at KUTV Focus on Health on Facebook and also on YouTube, and Health Focus on Instagram, and we'll definitely get back to you. I will leave you with the Did You Know segment.